This is the Infinite Receiving podcast, helping conscious leaders tap into a wealth of abundance across all areas of your life and business. I'm Susie Ashworth, and I'll be sharing with you how you can upgrade your reality through quantum transformation, because you are ready for infinite receiving. You are going to absolutely love this episode. I am chatting to Dale Pinnock, who is a Sunday Times bestseller, author 19 freaking times. He is a TV presenter. You might have seen him on stuff like Good Morning TV and also This Morning. He's a global teacher, trainer and coach. And his specialism is nutrition. He has been working in nutrition for the last 30 years. He has a brand called The Medicinal Chef. And this conversation goes in all of the places. Of course, we talk about food, we talk about calories, we talk about his relationship with nutrition and the level of passion that this guy has. Like, he made it all super, super sexy. And he also talked about it in ways that I have not heard before, or at least just landed with me very, very differently. However, we also talk about him being a lay Buddhist and the journey that he has been on, which was massively, massively driven by childhood trauma when it comes to the success that he has created in his business, and what has been on the other side of this kind of reawakening to who he is and how he wants to live his life. It is such a beautifully rich conversation. I really, really know that you are going to love it, and I would love to hear your feedback. So without any further ado, let's get into the episode. Is Susie Ashworth here, and you are listening to the Infinite Receiving podcast. And I am super excited to be bringing to you it's quite a big hitter guest. I'm quite excited to be sharing this lovely gentleman, and I'm not sure whether this is going to be the first podcast you hear with me talking to a man, but it is certainly the first one that I am recording. So this feels very special, especially as he just told me that he likes to listen to the podcast on his morning walks. And he was actually there in the audience at Expert Empires when I relaunched the podcast in its, well, not so new iteration now of Infinite Receiving. So yeah, there's some nice vibes going on already. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to the magnificent Dale Pinnock. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I feel very special being the first male to grace these hallowed halls.
Yeah, yes, obviously, there's a reason for everything. Everything has a reason, and so I am going to go with it. So I love to start at the beginning, and you have been in nutrition now for 30 years, which is, well, I don't mean to age you.
That's
you
right.
do look amazing. But I am curious.
Checks in the post, thanks.
When you go back to the beginning, so like the first 10 years of your life, were there any signs and indications that, of course, this is what you would be doing right now?
No, not at all. So I mean, it's like in the early years, and even in like my early teenage years, I wouldn't have thought for a millisecond that this is something that I would do, because I mean, my diet up until the time that I really discovered nutrition was absolutely atrocious. I mean, obviously when I was a young kid, I was just doing what young kids do. I was just into fishing and going out on my BMX and climbing trees, stuff that kids used to do back in the 80s. And as a teenager, I grew up in the rave scene, so trust me, food and nutrition wasn't top of my list. It was, Where's the meat? Where's the meat point? Who's got the tickets? Pirate radio, all of that good stuff, all of that amazing stuff. But it was only until I kind of got into my mid to late teens that I really got into this. It was 15 when I first had the seed sown, and it was because I had really bad acne, and I got to the point where I was willing to try anything. Yeah, I'd got really quite withdrawn. I certainly wouldn't like people to see me in daylight, which is weird. I used to walk around the neighbourhood with a scarf like up over my nose. I'm sure half of the pensioners in the area thought I was going to jack them or something. But I must have looked like a right little miscreant walking about. But I didn't want people to see my face. It was that bad. It kind of really broke out quite badly. And I got to about 15, sat around my friend's house one night, feeling sorry for myself, moping about the state of my skin, and his mum lent me this book, and it was a book called Fit for Life by Harvey Diamond, which is proper kind of old school 80s cult diet classic. She said, unless you look at what's going on the inside, nothing's going to change on the outside. So obviously being a 15-year-old boy in 1992, I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. But read this thing cover to cover in a weekend, because to be fair, if she would have said, look, the thing that's going to clear your skin is wrapping yourself up in tin foil on a full moon at midnight and running out into the garden, I would have done it. Yeah. I was ready to try anything. So I read this thing cover to cover in a weekend, and it was like that light bulb moment. There was the actual realization that, look, we can actively engage in our own healthcare. We can take steps every single day to engage in this whole process. This isn't a passive thing. This isn't something that's 100% out of our control. There's things that we can do for ourselves to influence this picture. And that was when I discovered it. And then as soon as I left school, I kind of started working in the industry. And here I am. I ended up going to university. I did my first degree in human nutrition, second degree in herbal medicine, and a master's in nutritional medicine. And yeah, it's been my life ever since. I don't know anything else.
15 is I still think is young to know exactly, well, not to know exactly what you're going to do, but to have the seed planted. I'm curious, what was the story with your skin? After you read this book, how long did it take for you to see a difference? Because I'm guessing that you must have seen a difference, otherwise you wouldn't have stayed committed to the cause.
Yeah, I certainly saw a difference in my skin, and that was like in less than 12 months, it looked completely different. But that, weirdly, wasn't the thing that really hooked me. It was like how much of everything else changed. It's like cognitive function, it's like I'd had a brain transplant. My energy, my focus, like my shape, everything just changed, just transformed, and I started eating real food. And that was the thing that really hooked me in. It's almost like the quest for solving the skin issues became a secondary thing.
Sure.
It was like, how far can I take this? What level can I get to with it? And that's sort of what took over.
So what type of things were you doing in the early days that made the big difference? Because I hear you said real food. So I'm guessing that means food that you're cooking.
Just adopted a whole foods diet, which, I mean, before, my diet was absolutely awful. It was kind of dirty burgers and weird concoctions I'd make in the microwave with like tins of beans, spices and grated cheese and God knows what else. It was awful. Then actually switching over to a diet that was abundant in like fruit, veg, nuts, seeds, whole grains, oily fish, good, healthy protein sources. All of a sudden, my body was taking in a level of nutrition that it had never come across before, and I think that was the real big factor. Weirdly, I did actually go vegan for over 20 years, but then after that point, it started failing me quite significantly.
I'm really interested in the conversation about veganism because in the world that I'm in, it was very fashionable for quite a while to be vegan, not just because of health, but also for the environment. And then particularly over the last year, I've heard now being a carnivore is quite fashionable. It's the meats, it's the fats. And along with that story, what I've heard again and again and again is actually how challenging it is to be a healthy vegan. So I'm really curious about whether you think that is true or whether it's, as with everything, is individual.
This is a really interesting one because the biggest driver for my decision to go vegan was actually ethical reasons, because I've also been like a practicing lay Buddhist since I was in my 20s. There's a Japanese lay form called Shinyoen. So when I was at university, I used to go to the temple all the time, and it just seemed like such a logical fit. I did have that emotional connection there. I think there's lots of different discussions. I think there's massive question marks over the environmental thing. It's just like, well, okay, like so you're not eating meat, but you're eating quinoa that's like been shipped over from Peru. Yeah, nice carbon footprint. So I think there's question marks over that. That's that's not my speciality. I couldn't comment with any level of authority on that. So that one, I will just shrug my shoulders. When it comes to the ethical argument, there is nothing to say. There is no debate, because clearly, if you're ethically driven, you're not going to want to be part of any kind of suffering. And there's no nice way of taking something's life. You can't paint any kind of picture outside of that. So that's the ethical side of things. When it comes to the health side of things, this is where I can give very strong comment. And there is an assumption, very much driven by propaganda, I would hasten to add, that a plant-based diet is automatically this health utopia. Yeah. It's the answer to every single problem you could possibly have. And all you need to do is go plant-based and ta-da, like everything disappears.
Yeah.
If only that were the case, if only any dietary strategy would give you that level of transformation and that level of certainty in outcome. It's a no-brainer that I think a lot of people see these massive changes because they've gone from a standard Western diet, standard UK diet of highly processed foods, loads of sugar, loads of trans fats, the normal gunk that most people are eating, and all of a sudden they've shifted over to a whole foods diet that just happens to be a plant-based diet. And all of a sudden they've started eating food that's designed for humans, finally, and their body responds likewise. Their body actually is making use of this abundance of micronutrients. And here's an interesting thing. I mean, this is a slight aside from that. If you look at all the different dietary strategies that are out there, like you said, there's carnivore, there's plant-based, there's macrobiotic, there's raw, there's all of these different extremes, all of them dramatically different from one another. But all of them seem to have these incredible transformational stories associated with them. You see so many people that have, like, certain disease processes have stopped in their tracks. They've reversed this, reversed that. They've lost loads of weight. But if all of these diets are so different, what on earth's going on? Which one's right? Well, there's one factor that unifies every single one of those diets. They all cut out the rubbish that's making us sick in the first place. There's not one of those that's just like, yep, you're going to eat Mackie D's 3 meals a day, or your diet from now on is going to be pizza and beer. They're not built around that. All of them are, to one degree or another, built around whole foods. Yes, the actual macro composition and foodstuff variety is going to be different across all of those, but they are all whole food diets in one way or another, and they're all diets that are keeping out the heavily processed, heavily refined, food-like substances that are making us sick and driving disease in the first place. So that's where that massive transformation comes from. But when you speak to people that have been on these things longer term, that's when you start to see the suitability of that particular approach. Some people can get into quite sticky situations with plant-based diets if they do not accept that there's going to be some nutritional gaps in that diet. Even if you look at the leaders in that field, the likes of Dr. Michael Greger and those kinds of people, they say there are certain supplements you need to take because you cannot get these things in a plant-based diet. This is it. This is what you need to take. As long as you are open to that and accept that, you can be very, very healthy on a whole food plant-based diet. Ultimately, what I would say is the most suitable for most people is just focus on whole foods and don't really worry about much else. So whole foods, it is food in its original form, the kind of food that our great-grandparents would have eaten. It's just, and like, going to use some really cheesy lines and quotes here, but they kind of illustrate the point. The first one is, if it ran, swam, grew or flew, then eat it, everything else leave behind. And the other one, which is probably a grammatical abomination, is real food doesn't contain ingredients. Real food is ingredients. You know, even though it sounds like a bastardization of the English language, it illustrates the point. If you get back to those basics, if you actually just get back to a whole foods diet built around fruit, veg, nuts, seeds, whole grains, good quality proteins, whether that's protein from plants, whether that's protein from animals, completely up to you. As long as you're building your diet around those fundamentals, it's very difficult to get it wrong.
I've got to say, you've just made this whole conversation very sexy to me. Like, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard. I suppose it's because I've never spoken to anybody who is generally talking about nutrition rather than their own specific special thing. Yeah. And so whenever you've got an angle, it's always the angle. But because you're talking about nutrition generally, it's like, oh, it's just whole foods. It completely makes sense.
Yeah. And, you know, if you kind of, from a very physiological point of view, you look at the design of, you know, our teeth, our digestive systems, we are omnivorous.
Yeah.
You know, we're not 100% plant eaters. We're not 100% carnivorous. We are physiologically omnivorous. So, you know what? Yeah. It's just eat lots of everything from in its natural form. You're going to be good.
I love it. Do you have strong opinions on, because calorie counting and weight loss and... Your face.
Do I?
Clearly.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, calories can if you're counting calories. I mean, one, it's a miserable existence. You know, and you don't need to do that. They can using them as a focal point can sometimes be useful to illustrate maybe the density of the food that you're eating, or as a illustration of how physically active you've been, something like that. In that context, they can be a relatively useful variable. But the calories aren't the thing that are making you fat, because the calories, it's like measuring heat. You know, it's not heat that causes the fire, right? And that's the thing. I mean, this is one hell of a rabbit hole. Okay, so strap yourself in. Do you know how calories are measured?
I want to say. Well, I was going to say kilojoules, but I think that's just another measurement.
No. Yeah, so they're basically they're put into a completely airtight, pressurized container called a bomb calorimeter that's filled with water. Inside that water, there's another airtight chamber where a sample of food is placed, and then it's incinerated into ash. So, one, releasing all of the energy that's there within that food. And then a calorie is the amount of energy it takes to heat one gram of water by 1 degree. So there's your measurement. Now, already, for anyone that's kind of studied human physiology to any kind of level, should already have a few question marks there. Firstly, the incineration of that food releases all of the energy in all of the chemical bonds within that food stuff. That doesn't happen in our body, okay? I mean, ash doesn't come out the other end, right? That's the thing. It's like, so the first concept is caloric availability. So it's like you look at this food and on the label there is X amount of calories there. But depending on the makeup of that food, what percentage of those calories are actually going to be available for your body to use? But still, the calorie isn't the important thing to measure. For me, I always use the phrase substrate is king. So anyone that's done any kind of chemistry, substrate, that is the initial substance that's fed into a reaction. Okay. Yep. So the substrate could be glucose, could be fatty acids, could be amino acids. So basically, it could be carbs, could be fat, could be protein. Those are the substrates. Where that energy is coming from will have a far greater impact than the energy value itself. So 300 grams of carbohydrates, 300 grams of fat, 300 grams of protein. Calorically, no, sorry, I said grams. I meant 300 calories. 300 calories of carbohydrates, 300 calories of fat, 300 calories of protein. Energetically, if you're just working on the calorie value, the impact should be exactly the same.
Yeah, but it's not.
But clearly, it influences our physiology in dramatically different ways. And let's use the glucose example. So the way in which you can start to lay down fat just to protect yourself from excesses in a given window of time. So let's use this example. If you eat, say, like a massive bowl of white pasta, with just a tomato sauce on it, right? You've got something there that's delivering a huge amount of glucose in a very, very small sitting.
Yeah.
The white refined carbohydrates, because they've had the fibre removed, take very little digestive effort to actually liberate their glucose content. And because they're just on their own with a simple sauce, it's like you get a rush of blood glucose. What happens is your body responds by releasing the hormone insulin. Insulin binds to an insulin receptor on the surface of our cells, opens a little doorway within our cells called a glucose transporter, allowing the cells to take up glucose that they can then use to manufacture ATP, which is what our body runs on. All good. This happens all the time. Every time we eat and blood glucose goes up, that whole sequence of events happens. That's where we get the energy from. The problem is cells can only take in so much glucose in one sitting. They've got a maximum amount that they can take in before that glucose has the potential to cause damage, glucotoxicity within the cell. So once the cells get to the point that they're full, they close the door. Now, blood sugar that's too high or too low, these are both potentially life-threatening states. So the body is very, very effective at dealing with either end of the spectrum. So if we're at the point where blood sugar's gone up really, really high, but the cells are full, there's still an excess that needs to be dealt with. So the next thing that happens is we will start to convert some of it into something called glycogen, which is a storage form of carbohydrate that we store within the liver and within the skeletal muscles. But we can only store so much glycogen, only a tiny amount. If our cells are full and if our glycogen stores are full and blood glucose is still above the maximal allowed amount, it's got to be dealt with. Every other method of dealing with it is gone. So it needs to be taken out of the way quickly so that it doesn't become a threat to the immediate environment, this excess of this particular substance. So it gets shuttled to the liver, and the liver will convert it over into triglycerides. Triglycerides will then be stored in our fat tissue. They're stored there for a rainy day. This is hardwired into our physiology from when we were evolving as a species. Two things happen there. Firstly, we start to put on weight. Yeah. Secondly, those triglycerides need to be sent to the fat tissue via the circulation, which means our blood triglycerides go up, our LDL cholesterol goes up, and we're at greater risk of cardiovascular disease as well. So we're putting on weight and our cardiovascular health is at risk. This can happen even if we are in that magical calorie deficit, because it's got nothing to do with calories. It's got to do with the fact that we are a physiological system, a group of physiological systems that controls its immediate environment to ensure survival. You've got a response, and it's a response to the substrate. That's why I say substrate is king, because there is an excess of a certain component. There is a physiological response to that in order to bring equilibrium back that has nothing to do with calories. This is why we need to get much more of a level of understanding about the composition of our day-to-day diets. And, without sounding like a broken record, if you go back to that whole picture of a whole foods diet, you're not going to get those kinds of issues, because you're going to be eating food that's got loads and loads of fibre and healthy fats and protein. This takes ages to digest, which keeps you full for a long period of time, but it also drip feeds your blood sugar, so you never get that excess in the first place, and that whole sequence of events doesn't happen. And another interesting thing with those fats that get shuttled into the adipose tissue at that point, if this person's diet is like that 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year, their insulin is going to be constantly high. As long as insulin is high, it's a one-way flow of traffic into that fat tissue. But as I said, this is something that's hardwired into us. So if you think about when we were evolving as a species, when we were kind of hunter-gatherers, we would spend most of the time in feast or famine. There were times when food was abundant, and there would be other times when food was scarce. So in times when food was abundant, we were able to gorge ourselves and actually store some energy for the times when food wasn't abundant, when there was scarcity. In those times of scarcity, insulin levels will drop. That opens up the adipocytes, those fat cells, and allows the fatty acids to leave that and then be used as an energy source. That's kind of how we're designed to work. But we're constantly pushing the traffic one way and never giving it a chance to come the other way. But if you're building your diet around those beautiful slow-burning foods and those amazing healthy whole foods, then you do that. And then there's practices like intermittent fasting and those kinds of things for people that are in quite a pickle when it comes to their metabolic health. Then intermittent fasting can help to bring that insulin down and really, really help to liberate some of that fat as well. So that's just an example of how it's not necessarily the calories, and this is why I get really frustrated with a lot of the bro science. Yeah, you get kind of like random person on Instagram. So it's just about calorie deficit. If you're not losing weight, you're not in a calorie deficit, and it's just like, okay, well after 6 months or 6 years or 10 years or whatever of people putting themselves through that miserable existence, that's when they turn up at my clinic. Their metabolic health is all over the place and we get them fixed. It's like, listen, we just need to get back to these basics. We need to understand how all of those systems work. We need to ensure that we're building a diet that allows those systems to work as they're designed, and the magic happens.
I think, and I'm hesitant to use good calories and bad calories in the same way as we've heard over the years, good fats and bad fats. I don't think that it's necessarily helpful. And at the same time, it is really helpful, that example that you've just given, because it's like, the number of people who are counting calories but thinking because they're having, I don't know, 3 plates of pasta and they're under their 1,600 or 1,400, like I should be losing weight because I'm only eating this number of calories a day. It's like, this is why it's not working. And I'm not sure, again, that I've heard it explained in that way before. So thank you.
This is the weird thing. What I explained is just the basics of human metabolism. It's just like, anyone that's kind of, got a nutrition degree or has studied at that level, it's just like,
it's obvious.
But, and that's what we're always fighting against, because this is such an ingrained belief. Now, I would defend the statement that when you lose weight, you're using more than you're storing.
Yes,
absolutely, that's true. But that's a very different statement to, in order to lose weight, you need to eat less and move more. These are two very, very different statements. And I think if we can get past that basic, because I've never in my life, in the entire time I've been doing this, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients that I've seen one-to-one, all of the work that I've done online, I've never met a single person that has been able to be in a calorie deficit long-term successfully and maintain weight loss using that approach. One, because it's like the whole analogy. If you want to drive 50 miles in your car and you put enough fuel in it to go 30 miles, you wouldn't stand there on the side of the M25 scratching your head when the car's conked out. You'd be like, well, don't understand it. Yeah, but if you're kind of not putting enough fuel in your body to allow it to do the things that it wants to do, and you're trying to do a workout and all the rest of it at the same time, you're going to come to a point where you'll crash. And just your normal physiological response to that level of scarcity will start to kick in. Either your appetite will increase, or you'll get incredibly lethargic and moody and brain fog and all the rest of it, or a combination of the two. You'll be knackered and starving, and that will just kick in, and you cannot override that forever. And that's the point. Like, you can't do it successfully long term. However, if you understand how food makes your body respond in a certain way, and understand how different responses will have different influences upon your metabolic health, and you use that to your advantage, all of a sudden you're doing to your body what is designed to be done to it. You're eating in the way that nature has already designed. It's already perfect. And that's the thing. As soon as we start getting too cocky, too clever, and like moving away from what nature has given us in abundance, then we pay the price.
Every time you speak, there's something I'm like, and that. But I do want to go back to what you shared about being a lay Buddhist. What was your journey to Buddhism, and what is a lay Buddhist?
A lay Buddhist means that you're not actually a monk or a nun. Okay. So you're not like an ascetic. You're actually you're just incorporating Dharma into day-to-day life. Really, that's it.
So my understanding of Dharma is purpose.
Just teaching. Teaching. It's like incorporating the Buddhist teachings and philosophies and ideals into day-to-day life. And trust me, it's very easy to be all sweetness and light when you're in a temple miles away from anyone. Existing on planet Earth in 2023, now that shit's a training ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's where you become the warrior, right? That's where you get to practice all of these things. Where you get to practice patience. Where you get to practice tolerance. Where you get to truly understand what your own karma is and why things are pushing your buttons in a certain way. And I think we're all having our buttons pushed at the minute. And then you understand your own biases and all of the things that are affecting how you respond to situations. And as long as you kind of approach that with an open heart and use that training ground for what it is, because we've got two choices, right? We can let this stuff like tear us to pieces and get us angry and frustrated and swear at everyone and all of that, or it can be like, right, okay, I'm reacting to something in a certain way, and there's a reason for that. It's got nothing to do with what's going on outside. Situations outside can create a challenge, but ultimately the response to the challenge is in relation to something within us. This is why I kind of really hate this whole culture of trigger warnings and stuff like that. It's like, look, these triggers are your stuff, right? It's like this isn't to be cruel or to be, your feelings or your responses don't count. It's just like, this is an absolute blessing. Don't run away from it. Don't hide under the duvet. This is an opportunity for you to become a more resilient, more rounded, more incredible person, because like the universe is showing you stuff that you're struggling with. If all of a sudden you can tackle it, then you're going to parry more as you move through life. So, I mean, I know we've gone on a bit of a tangent there, but that's certainly how I see kind of using Dharma in day-to-day life.
I'm so happy that you have said this. And I think that you maybe couldn't have said it 2 years ago, because I think that 2 years ago cancel culture is still... cancel culture.
It's how you say it. It's if you're what you're being triggered for, you dick. Like if you use the kind of keyboard warrior language, then you'll get cancelled. But you can say it sensitively. It's just like, well, look, you're being triggered by something which is causing a very, very strong feeling inside of you. But this is an opportunity for you to understand more about yourself.
It's a signpost.
And if you deal with that, that's going to make you even stronger.
I would argue that the culture that has been cultivated, particularly over the last couple of years, though, isn't a culture that is holding that level of emotional intelligence and resilience up there as one of our top values. I feel that the culture that has been cultivated is about coddling people and protecting people from feeling the wounds that clearly need to be healed in order for them to be able to evolve and move on and be a constructive member of society.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's very difficult. I think we're from a generation where we maybe did have to be a little bit more self-reliant in terms of dealing with our own stuff. And I mean, certainly, the way our parents respond to things, just like, this person hit me in the playground, to be like, well, yeah, hit him back.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be like a very, very different mentality. So it's quite difficult to truly, I guess, because this is the weird thing. The way in which we make sense of anything and perceive anything and string together our beliefs and our actions and our responses, albeit on a subconscious level, still comes from filtering life through that whole mesh of past experience, upbringing, social and cultural paradigm, all of that kind of stuff. So you've got me thinking there. It's like it must be very, very difficult for people of our generation to truly understand what maybe Gen Zs actually feel like. And that's quite an interesting thing. And I have to admit, I've not necessarily thought about it like that. So that's a good kind of counter to that, I think. It's
empathy, isn't it? The idea, though, that there's the saying that until you've walked a mile in someone else's shoes, don't judge. And that it's impossible to ever do that. And so maybe, the invitation is to not be judgmental at all.
Yeah, I think I certainly try to not come at things from a judgmental point of view, more of a I want to understand point of view. And because I've always been naturally inquisitive, and I am like an inquisitive little sod all the time, and I think those kind of discussions, like it's quite an interesting one. Like a few weeks ago, I was out with a friend of mine. We had a day in Cambridge. I hadn't seen him for ages, and we were going around different places. And we sat down and was talking to these group of girls. These group of girls were in their 20s, and they were really, I wouldn't say hardcore socialists, but they were very, very strong left. I don't know where I sit, to be fair, with everything going on. And we were having some really incredible debates. But then at the end of it, one of them turned around and was like, "Oh, thank you for that. You know, really, really respect these opposite opinions. That was great fun." How many people in this day and age can do that and then turn around and have that response? And that really kind of blew me away. I was just like, I loved that environment where we were able to like air these really strongly opposing views in some situations without any level of disagreeableness or hate or anger or any of those kind of things.
Yeah. I feel that what you're describing is the ability to still see somebody else's humanity, even if they have an opposing view.
Completely, yeah. And also, I'm very aware of the fact that my beliefs now don't match the beliefs I had when I was in my 20s, because the world was
of course not.
And I was. You know, I've got many more battle scars since then that have changed my perceptions on things. So I think always being aware that people, there's a constant evolution until your final breath. Do you know what I mean? And that's a really important thing to remain aware of as well. It's just like someone's on their journey in a certain place. It's like, let me understand where you are. Because if you show me where you are, I know how to relate to you.
So how did you get into Buddhism?
It was something that always made sense. I've always been quite, I don't want to use the word repelled because that would probably be a wrong word, but very immediately would recoil from any kind of, organised religion where there was idol worship or worship of something that was, you know, this idea of there being an omnipotent being that is above us and is kind of in judgment of us or in control of us. I was always, even at a very young age, when we first started studying religions at school, I mean, back then, we were talking about religion in infant school. Do you know what I mean? You do prayers at assembly and all that kind of stuff. But already I was just like, something about this just doesn't sit right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as soon as I got to about 10, 11, 12, it became crystal clear to me that spirituality is such a strong part of the human existence that none of the kind of religious things that I'd learned really made sense to me. And it was only when I started to learn a little bit about Buddhism that it kind of really echoed what I was feeling. It's just like, you know, this isn't. I mean, one of the first things the Buddha taught was like, you know, beware of idol worship. It's like, you know, this isn't about worshipping a deity. This is about having an understanding of yourself and how you interact with the world around you. And it can be said. Now, I would happily say that you could say the same thing about other religions, but they were just taught, those concepts were taught and explained within the confines of, again, social, cultural paradigm. You know, at that time, that is how you would teach those concepts. That's how the people of that era would understand those concepts. Maybe you could argue that, I don't know. And, you know, you certainly look at whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Quran. The teaching is the same. It's like, you know, the interaction you have with other people is the expression of spiritual existence. It is the expression of devotion. It is the expression of everything that your religion teaches. So those aspects, as I got older, I kind of made a bit more peace with. But at the time, it just seemed like something that just made more sense. That maybe, and then at the same time, even though I was a practicing Buddhist, I was very much into or getting interested in more of the modern day spiritual practices and the whole feeling that, you know, rather than God or the universe or whatever you want to call it being some kind of deity or being that's above us. We are part of it, and it is part of us, and we are an expression of it, and it is an expression of us, and everything in between. You know, and I guess there's elements of Taoism in there, and as well. And my belief became like an amalgamation of those two, in terms of how I sort of conducted myself and how I approached life. That was very much built around the Dharma. That was very much built around the Buddhist teachings. But then my understanding of my relationship to Source was it could only be experiential. It was very hard to kind of put it into any sort of rule book or any sort of. I mean, I've had times along my spiritual journey where my connection to Source was almost palpable. Like I could actually feel energies around me and moving through me and all sorts of things early on in my journey. So that's been a constant evolution as well. But the thing, to answer your question without going on one of my tangents again, the thing that drew me to it just made the most sense to me. It was just like, clearly there's something greater than us that we need to relate to. Otherwise, and weirdly, I've had experiences where I've lost touch with the spiritual aspect of life, and it cost me a great deal. Can take you to some quite dark places. It made sense at that point in time that this probably sits with how I feel about things.
I'm curious about the times in your life where you say that it was almost palpable, and what was going on that enabled you to have that level of connection?
I wish I knew. Bizarrely, I think, and I've heard other people say similar things when they've really immersed themselves into studying that kind of that aspect of life. When they've kind of put more focus on spirituality, their divine experiences suddenly became more frequent. Whether this is simple fact that we're more open to it in that moment, and something that's always been there, all of a sudden it has an opportunity to present itself. I don't know. I wasn't trying to have some kind of mystic experience. It was more a case of I was allowing that into my life, and as a result of that, these things started happening. And it was the only way. It's only people that have. Do you know what it means? Where all of a sudden you feel open.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're open and you can perceive energy to such a palpable degree. Because I've always been able to feel people's energies. Like I can meet someone and instantly I'll know what they're about in terms of like, are their intentions good or do I need to get the hell away from them? And it's never let me down once. So I've always been very, very sensitive in terms of that. I can walk into certain areas and be like, this isn't my place. I need to go somewhere else. So that wasn't any great mystery to me, but it got to the point where I could physically feel the resistance of the energies between myself and an object. Well, have you ever done that exercise, like that Taoist exercise, where you kind of with
you
chi,
feel the chi.
You can start to physically feel it. So imagine that, but between yourself and the wall, or yourself and another object. That's what it was feeling like, almost permanently for about 3 weeks at one point.
The way that you described that, it sounds like it was almost too much.
It was a bit intense, yeah.
Yeah.
I was about 25 at the time.
Yeah. What about the times, you said that there were times in your life where you kind of disconnected from your spiritual path and ended up
this is an interesting one.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one. Now, when I was at school, I was one of those people that didn't quite fit into one group or another. I was always a little bit of an outsider, a little bit of a misfit.
Same.
Often be the butt of people's jokes. I was so glad social media didn't exist then. I just didn't quite fit in properly, and I always felt like people were always taking the piss, and I was always just not enough. That kind of feeling. And when I got to the point where suddenly things started happening for me, I started getting noticed, I started getting out there, started getting in the media and that kind of stuff. It's like something else took over. And you know what? The pursuit of success was almost a way of me making up for how I felt then. It was kind of like, right, up yours, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what I'm worth. I'm going to show you what I can do. Strap in and watch this, mofos. That kind of attitude, right? That kind of... And I'm going to be honest, that level of that chip on my shoulder basically enabled me to achieve many of the things I have. It detracted me from actually enjoying the process.
Sure.
And it was almost like pursuing success was me trying to balance the books, me trying to redress that balance.
Get it.
You know, whereas what I should have done really is just heal the old wounds. But it was weird that I had that experience. So I said this not so long ago. I told this story, and this is where like that realization came to me. Okay, and it's really weird. And I nothing about this is a blag or bullshit. And don't just let me put it into context. It's not about anything else. But obviously, I'd done all right at this point. I was off to Los Angeles. I was going to be going on a show called Good Morning La La Land. Don't know, remember Dr. Erin?
Oh, I love Dr. Erin.
Yes. Yeah.
Love
So it's
her.
Good Morning La La Land. So I was on my way to do that show. I was sat on a plane, 30,000 feet, British Airways, first class, feet up, lovely plate, a lovely spread of food. Literally, like, I'd arrived. Life was good, but I was miserable as sin because it was just stuff. I'd got to this point where, like, the pursuit of this level of success was my absolute focus, and nothing else mattered. And it was like that level of focus was there because there was so much pain from the past of never feeling like I was enough. I wanted to just turn around and be like, yeah, see that? Kiss it. This is what I can do. But I completely neglected myself in the whole process. And I started to forget all of the things that I loved about the subject. And I started to almost forget the love that I had for what I did for a while. But then I kind of sat there and I was like, holy like these things tend to come to me like out of nowhere, like a kick in the nuts from the universe, just completely unawares. These realizations appear, and that one hit me, and I was like, my God, I've been so vapid for such a long time. But instantly, as soon as I was aware of that, my whole set of priorities shifted, and weirdly, immediately after that, so many other things started going quite badly in my life. So, you know, like my best friend passed away, and then my dad passed away, and then there was lockdowns, and there was like one thing after another, and it got really, really chaotic. So I had that realization, then was literally given an opportunity to reconnect with what actually matters to me and what's actually important and like who I actually am, and just to find. Have you read the Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman?
I haven't actually.
Such a special book. Oh my! You have. It's beautiful. It's incredible. But there's one line in there. It's like the warrior doesn't give up what he loves. The warrior finds the love in what he does. And that's what it was. It was like because my life had been taken over by this pursuit of success that was just trying to heal the past. I had not felt any love for life for a long time. And I had to reconnect to that, which for the first, when you first have the realization, that's an incredibly alarming thing to actually realize, because you're like, what on earth happens to me if I become some kind of shell, if I become some kind of, vacant vessel? But then also that realization allowed me to let it back in. And what's happened after that has just been incredible. Like, it's just the pace of life changed, my connection with life changed. Things just got so much simpler. And all of a sudden, my ability to communicate the subject, my ability to create incredible work now has just weirdly taken a massive leap up. So, yeah, it's been quite a strange experience.
Again, there's lots in there. So one of the things that I teach in Infinite Receiving is the worth triangle, and you have self-worth, net worth, and your, I've lost my third worth, your experiential worth. So like your experience of life. And what is super interesting is I think that a lot of people come to the work having had a similar experience to you, or have grown up in environments where it's all about the money, it's all about the money, it's all about the money. But the experience of life and their experience of self is completely depleted. And so then the pendulum swings the other way, and they're like, okay, I'm going to renounce money because it's all about the money. It's been all about the money. It's all about the success. And I'm just going to work on the other two areas. It actually, you get to work on all three. There's nothing wrong with success. And I want to ask you about
absolutely not.
Now
what,
in this,
it's a lot more miserable, right? Struggling, that's a sure fact.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with success, but everything that you said about you've got to love life. This is the one, in this body, this suit, this is the one chance that we get to do it. The idea that you're going to, you can earn enough money or have enough success to be okay in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or when you retire, like that's scary. And the knowing of yourself and that relationship to yourself, your enoughness, is, well, it sits at the heart of all of that. So I'm really curious, because you said that really even the start of this year was tough. And when I listened to you speak, part of the opening up, you said this second half of the year is even, well, it's quite remarkable. So I'm curious how much of the story that you just told also plays into even 2023.
Well, I think because that was almost like the post-COVID recovery. In terms of getting, I mean, that was very much from a business point of view, because obviously during that time was quite a struggle for me, because obviously I had like this layering of these quite traumatic events, and then there was like all the chaos of the lockdown and stuff, and these realizations that I'd been so focused only in one kind of aspect of life. I had to kind of put all those pieces back together again and sort of figure out what my next move was and how I was going to move forward in terms of doing business and my career and that kind of stuff. So the first half of the year was difficult in that respect, because I had to relearn who I was and what I represented and what I stood for and what my values were and what I really wanted to do next. And the other weird thing, this is a really, really, really strange problem to have. Okay. I know people talk about things like vision boards and all of that kind of stuff, right? I've had several versions of those. Every single career goal that I set myself, I've achieved in under a decade. Every single one. But because the pursuit of those was such a focus, it was my life. My life was achieving those goals. Then when I achieved them, it's like, oh,
done.
Now what?
Yeah.
And that was another thing. I had to sit there and think, well, now what? Now what? What am I doing this for, and all the rest of it? It's, the analogy I use. Did you ever watch Only Fools and Horses?
Yeah, a little bit.
There's the episode where Del and Rodley finally became millionaires, and they left the flat, and they see Del just on his own in his mansion, just twiddling his thumbs, and they both go back to the flat, and Del finds his old suitcase, and he was like, "It was the chase. I just loved the chase. I loved the journey." Yeah. It was like that was the lesson, and that's kind of postcard style, isn't it? Just like, it's not the destination, it's the journey, and that all that stuff. But it's true. That was the other big truth as well. It's just like there was so much purpose in achieving those things. I'd never for 5 minutes sat there and thought, well, what's going to happen if I do achieve them, or what next?
Yeah.
And that's where I got to. And that's quite destructive. No, I wouldn't say destructive, disrupting as well. Like, because so much of your identity is the pursuit of the goal. Once all the goals are there, it's just like, oh shit, now what?
I think that it can be destructive and disruptive. There's they talk about people who make it to the moon, and how, again, the focus is the moon, get to the moon, get to the moon, get to the moon. And then after you've got to the moon, what's next? When you've literally seen the entire world, and that has been your entire world for years, who are you after you come back? And again, it's why often we talk about the goal beyond the goal, because there will have been times before you reached every single one of your goals, you will have known, whether it is days or weeks or even months before, that it was happening. And as soon as you know that it is essentially done, I think that that's the opportunity to ask yourself what is next, so that you should die not having completed all of everything that you wanted to do, because for me, at least, energetically, there is okay, this is done way before I manifest it, way before it actually happens in my reality. I am the person, I feel the person, the doubt is eradicated, and then it's just a case of how many more steps am I willing to take until I actually see it in my life. And I think that as soon as you get to knowing that, then we get to stretch and expand. However, all of that is redundant if the only reason why you're really going for all of these things is to make yourself feel like a better human. You have to know who you are, and intrinsically know your worth and know your wealth for any of that, for the journey, any of those steps to be at all meaningful. Yeah.
100%. And that's the kind of weird dichotomy of my whole journey, you know. So it's quite an interesting time that there was an incredible level of achievement on one side of the coin, but then an incredible amount of self-abandonment at the same time. And that's quite a humbling and uprooting thing to realise. So that's the zone that I'm in now. But at the same time, it is allowing me to connect to people in different ways, and ways that I can't quite explain. So it's really bizarre things that started happening over the last sort of 12 months. When I have conversations with men, they just start opening up to me on levels that they've never been able to. And I've not sat there and tried to coach them over a pint or anything daft like that. It's like, and these are total strangers. All of a sudden, just the conversations have just started going into directions where they've been able to open up sides of themselves that they never thought they would be able to.
Yeah.
And people are opening up to me in different ways. So I'm obviously having, I'm putting some different energy out there. I guess it's a case of figuring out where it goes and what the purpose of that is, and what the next step is. I mean, clearly I still need to be working with nutrition and wellness, but how these things are delivered and how I do it next there's a lot of question marks over it. But certainly there's such a shift in the way that people are sort of responding to me is very different from how it used to be before. There's much more. It's on a much more human level.
Yeah,
it's
so interesting.
Not that it wasn't.
No, go on. I was just going to say it's very interesting. I'd just come back from Colombia, and it was a mixed group, and actually working with the men was quite remarkable. All, like yourself, very successful individuals. Multiple 6, 7, multiple 7-figure entrepreneurs. There was one guy there that had exited his business for 100 million, but all of them came with not what's wrong with me? There's something missing. There's something not quite right. I don't know how to move forward, and them being caught up in themselves. And what I witnessed with all of these men is, one, because they were willing to be coached and willing to open up, there was a softening of the armour that was protecting their hearts. And, again, not dissimilar to you, all of them had experiences where they had learned that it wasn't safe to be vulnerable, where it wasn't safe to be open, where it wasn't safe to be completely themselves, because otherwise they may get abused or taken advantage of. And what was incredible is that as these guys opened up, for us as women, also, I mean, I can't speak from the other men's perspective, but as a woman, being in this space where these guys were being open and vulnerable and trusting you, it immediately then made us trust them. And that sense of safety, it felt so safe to be in their presence because they were open. And what I hear, I make the same leap. Because you feel safe and your heart is more open, people immediately energetically feel like that. I've never met the Dalai Lama, but I've seen enough people on TV burst into tears the moment that they come into his presence, because they feel energetically the love that is just emanating from him. And that's why the business becomes easier. That's why people want to be around you. That's why you become more magnetizing. It is the work that you do to come from a genuine heart space.
Wow, that's really quite interesting, and in some ways that kind of explains a lot as well. I think certainly in the wellness industry, I think there's a lot of people find their way onto that path because they're on a healing journey themselves, and I guess there can be certain situations that you'll always be pushing away from you because you've not healed the things that are repelling it.
Yeah.
And there's certain things you're not bringing into your world because like the wounds are just pushing it away. And the more things that you heal, the more things that you face, the more things that you work through. Yeah, I'm just literally like that. From what you said, I'm just having this realization right now as we're kind of sat here. So I'm just trying to vocalize the insight that I just kind of had. But yeah, it just makes so much sense. And it's not. The weird thing is, it's not like any of these concepts are alien to me. What it was that I didn't realise where I was because until you come face to face with those issues and understanding what they are. This kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier on about triggers and all that kind of stuff. When there's so many deep rooted things that are allowing you to or causing you to act in a certain way, almost with subconscious drivers.
Yeah.
Unless you actually become aware of them, you can never address them and heal them.
There's a couple of things. There's the knowing on an intellectual level, and then there's a knowing from an embodiment and an embodied level. And it's like you've been studying Buddhism for however many years. So in an intellectual level, you know all of this stuff, but that's very different from knowing from an experiential level what this means and what it feels like. And, I've had experiences in this last month where I've been taken through practices, and whilst I've been in the middle of the practice, I've been like, oh, this is self-love. Like, I've spoken about what it means to love yourself and, all of that for so many years. And it's like, oh, no, I've just felt it. Oh, no, I've just felt what divinity feels like in my body. And I'm sure there are many, many, many more layers, but it tells me what you said earlier on about when the energy was almost palpable of spirit, of source, and you think probably it's when you're in the practice, it makes it more open to it. I'm like, that is it. The more you're in practice, the more potential you give yourself for actually having the embodied experience of everything that we've studied and everything that we've been learning. So, I'm curious, Dale, what is your vision for the future right now?
This is quite an interesting one because obviously with everything that we've just talked about, I think I'm in a new creative process in trying to actually understand what my vision for the future is. Because for such a long time I was so lost in that. Well, not lost. My entire focus was on that pursuit of those goals, that vision I had before. And now that I've actually reached that, it's almost like I wouldn't say starting from scratch, but it's like understanding what the next step really is. And I'm still making sense of that, if I'm honest.
Okay, well, I would say that means exciting times, being open to following the nudges and seeing where the universe wants to guide you. So, as you know, my new book, Infinite Receiving, is going to be out soon. And I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you. Quick fire. So, what does Infinite Receiving mean to you?
Understanding that we are the curators of our own reality.
Do you think that you're good at living that?
I certainly have been. I've certainly been able to. Well, it's weird, right? Okay, so from a purely sort of manifestation point of view and goals and those kinds of things, it's worked like magic in my life, like to ridiculous levels, like knowing that I'm going to meet a certain person or going to get to work with certain people, or that side of things is incredible. I think I've still got a lot to learn in terms of day-to-day experiential side of life, and all the things that we spoke about, how how you can sort of forget to love the everyday moments. So reconnecting with that, because I guess without that, it's only part of a picture, isn't it?
Where or who in your life can you allow people to love you just a little bit more right now?
Oh, good God, you've got me totally stumped on that one. Yeah, that's a really difficult thing to even think about. It's I would say probably understanding the challenges that I had and that went through, and that I'm now the other side of those, and I'm trying to pick up the pieces of those. And I think the people that are in my immediate environment absolutely do in that respect. But I think other people that may have got caught up in things, hopefully they can see it and they can understand.
What is your greatest attribute?
I'm a perpetual student.
What, and this might be open, but what one thing are you consciously working on manifesting right now? And final question, where can you allow yourself to be more supported in your life right now?
Finding that clarity. So I guess, like you when you were saying about your experience in Colombia, like being coachable.
Yeah.
Allowing people to help me find that direction.
I love it. Dale, I have loved this conversation so much. Thank you for popping our cherry. We all deeply appreciate it. Where can people find out more about your work and how you can support them?
So I'm active all over social media. If you head over to Instagram, it's just The Medicinal Chef. YouTube, it's Dale Pinnock Nutritionist. And my main website is dalepinnock.com.
Okay, thank you so much. You're
Thanks
amazing.
So much
I hope that
it's been amazing. You know what? It's like some of the things that we've actually got to talk about and got to touch on. It's been amazing.
Oh, thank you. If you have loved this episode as much as I have, please do me a favour. Go and tag Dale on Instagram, tag me, share this with a friend. Let's spread the word, because this word has been good. Right, I love you. You are amazing. And please remember that faith plus action equals miracles. Thank you for listening to Infinite Receiving with me, Susie Ashworth. I'd love to share with you my Infinite Receiving activation audio. Go to susieashworth.com/activate infinite receiving.